Our dear Heavenly Father, Almighty God, we're so very thankful for all your many wonderful blessings. This day that we can be here to worship you, this day that we can be here to have this class. So very thankful for your word that guides us in our lives. Thankful for this class, this time that we can study your word, that we can look into the Old Testament and see the history of the Israelites and the things that we can study there, and how we can apply these things to our lives today. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, we are looking at 1 Samuel chapter 14 and 15 today, and there's just a lot of wonderful stories there, and so let's get right into it. I looked into some of the names of the places and names there, and this word here, mishmash. Anyone know what that name means? What's it mean, Sherry? Well, it means laid up or concealed place. That's what it means in the Hebrew. Okay, and some of these other names like Beth Haven. We know what Beth means. That's house. What's Beth Haven mean? Anybody know? Anybody look that up? See what that means? Beth Haven, house of vanity, iniquity of trouble. Okay, that's what that means. How about Beth Horon? Anybody look that up? What that means? That has something to do with the story, actually. The men of Israel were they were hiding in caves. So Beth Horon means house of caves. House of caves. Okay, and Orphra. That means what? Anybody look that up? Means fawn or young deer. Okay, and in the story, these two cliff faces, Bozez and Senah. Anybody look that up? What those names mean? Okay, Bozez means shining, and Senah means rocky crag. Okay, so that goes with the story. Okay, and then some of the names in the story. Ahijah. Let me look that up. Yeah, go ahead. My brother, the Lord. Brother of the Lord. Ahitub. Let me look that up. Ahitub, my word is goodness. Of course, we know what Ichabod is. Remember that from the story of Eli? Go ahead. Yeah, without glory. And what about the name Carmel? Carmel from chapter 15. Did we look that one up? Saul's going to stop there for a reason. Carmel is garden or orchard. Okay, let's get into the story here. So, this is the battle here. The battle scenario here. Jonathan's going to go up. See, this is a lay of the land south to north, and this is like a dividing line here. The Israelites are going to be here, the Philistines are going to be camped here at Michmash. Okay, and they're going to have their three raids going this way, that way, and this way. Okay, and the Israelites And so the Israelites come. Saul comes from Gilgal down to Gibeah, and they're camped here at Gibeah, and they're looking this way to the Philistines, and the Philistines are making raids. And so, of course, Jonathan goes up here to this dividing. This is like a dividing line. He crosses over from here to the Philistines this way, up this way. Okay, so that's the idea here. Okay, so and then after Jonathan crosses over here, it starts the battle. Then the Israelites join from this way, and then the other Israelites come in from other places down this way, and then the Philistines flee back to their territory that way. So that's the idea of the battle. Okay, so let's get into the lesson here. So chapter 13 was setting the stage for what's going to happen in chapter 14, which is the battle here. So, and we went over that already. So chapter 14 is going to show the idea of chapter 14 in this battle is going to show a contrast between which two characters in the story. Yeah, go ahead, Jesse. Yes, it's going to show the contrast between two characters, Saul and Jonathan. So in chapter 14, who stays under a tree and who takes action? Yeah. So Saul here, going back to the previous slide, Saul in the army, which is his 600 men come from Gilgal, he has a sacrifice here with and doesn't wait for Samuel in Gilgal. And that's chapter 13, sets the stage. And then him and his 600 men come over to Gibeah, and then they just sit here and do nothing. But then Jonathan, he takes action, and that's what we're going to see in chapter 14. Okay, that's we're going to see in chapter 14. Okay, so what does Jonathan do here in chapter 14? What's Jonathan do while Saul's just sitting there? Yeah. Yeah. So here's a picture, actual picture. This is the dividing line here. See, this is south, and this is north. And here's those two cliffs, Bozez and Sinet. They have a picture of them. And I don't know what the scale of this is, just actually how large they are. But so what's going to happen is either I think Jonathan's going to come down this way and then go up this way, or the Philistines are up here. Okay, so that's what's going to happen. Okay, so I didn't actually know how to picture this in my mind until I got this picture. So Jonathan comes down with his armor bearer this way, and then goes up here to the Philistines. So looks kind of steep. So he has to go up with his climb up this way to the Philistines. Okay. So he says to his armor bearer in chapter 14, he says, "Come, let us cross over to the Philistine garrison that's on the other side." That's the other side. Okay. So Saul's just sitting there, and with Ichabod, son of Phinehas, they refer back to Shiloh when Shiloh was there, and so they cross over to the sharp crags. Here's the sharp crag they're talking about. Okay, Bozez and Sinet right there in verse 4, and this on this side over here, up there is Michmash. And Jonathan says, "Come, let us go over." And that's what he says. So that's where they're going. So what does Jonathan say to the armor bearer? And what does it reveal about Jonathan? What's he say here? Yeah, go on.
They say we hear when he says, come up, we'll know that God has given them instructions.
Well, we're not at that point yet, but what does he say in verse 6? That's what I'm asking. Anise.
Men in the outpost that was there, and he said because God has given them to our hands.
Well, we're not to that point either. What's he say in verse 6?
He said, the Lord is not restrained to say that.
Okay, that's what I'm looking for in verse 6. He says, we're going to go over there because God's not restrained by many or few. What's that mean? First of all, what's that mean by many or few? God's not restrained to save by many or few. Right. He's saying that if we go over there and God is with us, God will give us the victory no matter what. It doesn't matter. God's not limited no matter what the number.
Why he wouldn't tell his father that why does he not tell him that?
Why is it he didn't tell us that? Let's go. What happened back in chapter 13? What did we see back in chapter 13? Yeah. Saul was afraid back in chapter 13. The people fled from him. So Jonathan could see that Saul doesn't have any confidence. He is not a good leader. That God's not with him. So why would he tell Saul, his father? That's not going to do any good. He can see that way is not going to be prosper in the battle. Okay? But who is a man of faith? Is this showing that Jonathan's a man of faith? And what does that say about Jonathan? What he says right now? He is a man of faith, and that he believes in God. Isn't that what God really wants from us? Faith. He believes in God, and he knows that God will give the victory if we have faith. Okay? That's what it says about Jonathan. But what's God always say to them? If you believe in me and depend on me, I will give you the victory. That's what God has always told them. Depend on me and you will get the victory. Jonathan knows this, and he knows that if he just believes and depends on God, God will be with them. That's what it says about Jonathan. So what happens? We'll go on in the story. What does the armor bearer say in verse 7? Cindy? The armor bearer knows. He knows Jonathan's a man of faith. He knows he can trust in Jonathan. He knows he can trust in God. He's a man of faith too. So they cross over. Okay? Well, he says, we're going to reveal ourselves. We're going to go up this way so that they can see us. Okay? So, so now, what sign does Jonathan say that God is going to give him? He's going to rely on God. What sign does he say God's going to give him? Cindy.
If they say, wait till we come to you, then they know, Jonathan says, we're just going to stay where we're at. But if they say, come up to us, then we're going to go. God gave us the victory.
Yeah. So actually, he's saying we are going to depend on God. God will give us a sign, and then we know God's with us. Okay? So, They reveal themselves to the Philistines, and they're asking for God, depending on God. Okay, so they reveal themselves to the Philistines, and what happens? Do they get their sign? What's the Philistines say to them?
Come up here. We're gonna tell you something good. We're gonna tell you a good thing. Then what does Jonathan say? Jonathan says, "The Lord has given them into our hand. Let's go. God is with us. God is going to be giving us the victory. God will give them into our hand." So they have to climb up this steep hill right here. They have to climb up there. And once they get up there, what happens when Jonathan fights the Philistines? Yes? Yeah. The Philistines he slays the Philistines. Okay. So then something else happens. Something else starts to happen. Let's put it this way. God starts taking his hand into effect along with Jonathan starting the action. So Jonathan slays the Philistines along with his armor bearer, and the earth starts trembling, and it starts getting more and more and more. So now God is helping to defeat the Philistines here, along with when Jonathan shows his faith and he believes in God.
God is helping to defeat the Philistines. Okay? So here's your contrast. Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely. Yeah.
So they could have been killed easily right there.
Absolutely. In military tactics, this is an absolute never ever go up from low ground to high ground. You will die. Dale is absolutely right. You will never ever have any military man say, approach high ground. You never do.
I think you're kind of taken into one of the reasons why Jonathan and David wound up being so close, because they had such an enormous faith that the battle belongs to the Lord. This is God's victory. This is God's plan for us. I just think it's remarkable to see the similar levels of faith that they both exuded in these moments like this. The Lord's going to deliver them into my hands, and let's just make sure that we have the faith to accomplish His will.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like any military man will say, never, ever. If you look at, especially, I've looked at a lot of Civil War battles, and whenever any military person went up to high ground, they were slaughtered. They were absolutely slaughtered. It was always the person on high ground had an absolute advantage. Yes, and
Excuse me. It also showed how courageous Jonathan was too.
absolutely. It shows his absolute faith in God. Is what it shows. It shows a contrast here between Saul sitting over here under the tree and Jonathan saying, you got to trust God. That's what it shows. The contrast. This is what it shows here, the contrast. And it will continue to show that throughout the whole story. Okay, now we go on. So now, what Saul has watchmen looking at the Philistines. What does Saul's watchman see? He sees something happening. What's he see, Cindy?
He wants to know who's not in their camp.
Okay, not get ahead of the story. The watchman sees something first. He sees what's going on and reports it back to Saul. What's he see?
The Philistines are melting away.
Absolutely. The watchmen are looking out over Michmash from over by Gibeon. And you gotta remember, this is only like 5 miles away. So he has watchmen out ahead of him, doing reconnaissance. And they see something terrible, a tumult. The Philistines are melting away because of the earthquake. And here's a little picture of the earthquake, and the Philistines are in tumult. Okay? And he says, they report back to Saul and said, something's going on over there. Something's happening over with the Philistines. Okay? So now, the next is, what does Saul want to know? What does he want to know? He asks something. Okay? What is it that Saul wants to know? Cindy?
Who's not in our camp?
He says, who is it that's causing this? Okay? Who is it that went over there and caused this? Okay? So, he finds out who it is. Who is it? Jonathan that went over there. Okay? Jonathan went over there. See, we're having this contrast throughout the story. Saul just sits there, and Jonathan's the one taking action. And Saul wants to know who's doing this.
I keep reflecting back to in 12, where Samuel addresses his final address, and he's basically telling Samuel or Saul or the people that in verse 20 it says, then Samuel said to the people, do not fear, you have done all this wickedness, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. And it was not only the faith that Jonathan had, but he was willing to do the service that God was, and that was, he was backing up his statement that the Lord will help us through these battles.
Absolutely. They're showing the contrast between these two men. So now, Saul, what does he say to the priest? He says, bring me what?
The ark.
Bring me the ark. So now Saul wants to inquire of God. That's what the ark's for, to inquire of God. He says, bring me the ark. And in the meantime, this is getting worse and worse. God is helping the Israelites, and Jonathan's out there alone, but Saul's messing around. This contrast is just shown, okay, between Jonathan and Saul. And what does Saul then again say to the priest after the ark is brought? Because this tumult's getting worse and worse. And the earthquake's getting worse and worse. He says something else to the priest. What's he saying? He thinks he's going to do something about what God is doing. That's my interpretation. What I think he's trying to do. He's trying to intervene in what God is doing. I just think it shows the arrogance and the heart of Saul is just far from God. Just far from God. He does not have a good heart. If he thinks that he's going to intervene in what God is doing, instead of following God and being a man of faith like Jonathan is, it shows the contrast. So, does Saul finally enter the battle and do what he's supposed to do? Like lead the Israelites? He does. He finally, it says he starts to lead like he's supposed to. A king, he was anointed king for the specific purpose of leading them in battle. And finally, after he sees this getting So the Philistines are melting away and getting worse and worse. He finally enters the battle. Okay? He finally gets in the fight. Finally enters the fight. And who came forth? Who came and fought with Saul and his men? What's it say? Yeah.
The Hebrews,
Yeah.
that defected.
We go back to the beginning. We go back to the beginning. It says a lot of the men who were what? Men who were what? Get into the fight. Who were the men that says got into the fight with Saul and his men? See, Saul only had 600 men with him. Who came and helped Saul with the fight? Denise.
It says that those Hebrews who had previously been with the Philistines had gone up with them to their camp.
These traitors who were with the Philistines turned away from the Philistines, started fighting the Philistines, and who else? Somebody else.
It says all the men of Israel who had hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim.
Okay. All the ones who were hiding and had fled away, okay, they came out. So everybody starts getting in the fight, okay, because God has shown them that God was helping Israel now.
When Jonathan and his armor bearer were coming up the hill, the Philistines said that, look, it's the Hebrews who are coming out of their hiding places.
Right? So God had turned the battle so that Saul and Israel could now win the fight. Okay. So what we see here is that this is a battle that took not just a few minutes, but it took some time. Is that the word spread that God was fighting for Israel, and that people heard about it, and they came and helped Saul with the 600 men, and a large group of men now started fighting the Philistines. So, how did Israel win the victory that day? What's it say? Cindy?
God saved Israel that day.
God did it. God did it. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting the way the Philistines got caught between the two on both sides. The same thing happens in the 29th chapter when David had fled Saul and he was living with the Philistines by Kish and actually served him. And then when the Philistines wanted to attack Israel, he said, not this time, David's not going with us. They learned their lesson on that.
Right. Yeah, so this good that you mentioned that. This happened like many times. When the Israelites saw that things were going against them, they would turn and be with the enemy, or they would hide. So here, God helped them see that they needed to come back and fight the Philistines, and that God gave them the victory that day. Okay? So that's what we see here. Okay? So then we have we see details are given us on what happened that day. So we're kind of like going back and seeing details of what happened during that battle. Okay? And again, this is going to show us a contrast between Saul and Jonathan. Okay, we're going to see that. Okay, so
It says in verse 24, it starts telling us the details of what happened that day, and it shows us a contrast. In verse 24, it tells us that things weren't going well during the battle, and it tells us why. Why were the men not very successful in the battle against the Philistines? Instead, it could have gone really well, but somebody did something really dumb. Why was it not going very well? What hampered the men? Cindy?
Well, Saul makes a rash vow that
that no one is to eat anything until after the victory is taken off, after they've had victory.
Okay. And so he made this foolish vow. He says, no one is to eat anything until I've conquered my enemies this day. And I looked and did some research on this, and some of the commentators said that this was reminiscent of a pagan vow, that this was not like what the Israelites should vow. This was something that was very stupid for Saul to do. But the man took this vow along with Saul, and so, again, you can't do this when you're leading an army. Go ahead, Tim.
The vow is foolish, but the motivation, he says, is until I am avenged on my enemy. So, God, Jonathan's the one who's fighting, and God is the one who's giving the battle, and yet again, Saul somehow wants to be the one who's avenged on his enemy.
Right.
And it also, the fact that he's making this foolish vow goes back to things in Judges, with Jephthah's vow, and the vow in chapter 21, where they won't take wives, where people are just making foolish vows that cause big problems.
Right.
God should be the one who decides when you're fasting. It should not be your decision.
And if this is the stupidest vow, one of the stupidest vows you've ever heard, I mean, here's an army that's trying to win a victory, and you're telling them not to eat? How dumb is that? That's just plain stupid. You can't do that to someone who's doing a great deal of work, running, fighting. You just can't. If you limit that, you're limiting what people can do. Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I think there's a similar vow in the New Testament when they were trying to kill Paul. These assassins vowed never not to eat until Paul was also. But
yeah, that's another similar thing that was also stupid, but we can see that was, yeah.
Napoleon said that an army marches on its stomach.
Yeah, that's true. And you just can't limit somebody eating when they're working. You just can't do it, especially in army.
It was against their law. They were prohibited to eat meat with blood in it. They were eating raw.
We'll get to that.
Oh.
That comes later on in the story here. That's a very important part. So then, how did Jonathan, and I put in parentheses, and God show how troubling Saul's oath was? That comes next in the story here. So how did Jonathan show how troubling, how stupid that was? And that means, how did they contrast Jonathan and Saul? How does that contrast? Cindy?
Well, Jonathan found the honey and he ate it, and he had his men eat it, and they still had energy to keep on going.
Okay, that's partially right. Jonathan comes by. See, he's out there alone, and now the men catch up to Jonathan. Okay, so Jonathan is out in the forest, it says. It says this takes place in a forest. Okay, and the God part is there's honey there. And no one actually knows how that honey was there. Either they say it was the land of milk and honey, and so honey just happened to be there. Or they say the Philistines had it as provisions, and when they fled, they left it there. And it was on the ground. Only thing we know is it says honey was on the ground. So, Jonathan, not knowing about the stupid oath that Saul made, he was hungry, and he tasted some. And so the other soldiers, it says it troubled the army, because they were under the oath, and they didn't eat, so they were very weary. And Jonathan noticed it. They told him about the oath. Jonathan said, my father has troubled the army of Israel this day because he hasn't allowed anyone to eat. Now look at me. I came along, here's some honey, I tasted it, and what did it do for Jonathan? It gave him strength. It gave him, he said, it brightened my eyes. In other words, it's a good thing to eat when you're hungry. Okay? So that's the first part of the story. Now, the first part of the story is that. Now, when we go along to the next part of the story, what Sister Nancy said, how had Saul's foolish oath caused the men to sin in verse 32? They go along. Now the Philistines, when they fled, they left their provisions, which in the perspective of the other side is more. So when Saul's army comes upon what the Philistines left, and they're all so hungry, what does the army do when they find the livestock of the Philistines?
They're eating the meat raw with the blood in it.
Well, not exactly. There's a certain way that you're supposed to prepare your food when you're an Israelite, a Hebrew. Okay? You're supposed to do it a certain way. But if you're out in the field, you don't have time to do it that way. Okay? And what's that way called? You're supposed to drain it fully. Okay? But if you're out in the field, what do? Well, you just kill the animal, and you don't have the time to hang it up and drain it. So they weren't doing it the prescribed way. And so they were not doing it the right way. So they weren't doing it according to God's law. Okay? And that's why they were doing it, and that was a sinful way. Okay? So that's why they called it eating it with the blood. They weren't properly draining the animals of blood. Okay? And that's why they said they were eating it with the blood. Now, when it was told Saul, they said the people are eating the animals with blood. What did Saul do? What did he say? This is just shows the contrast again. Saul said what? You're acting treacherously. Oh, wait a minute here. Who caused him to do this? Saul did. And he's now blaming the people for that. It's his fault. So Saul then told them to do what? You get your animals and bring them here and drain the animals properly and do it the right way. And they did. Okay, so Saul, he did that to help the people not sin. Okay? But he was the problem in the first place. Again, it's his problem. He caused it. Okay? So then we get to another thing. Why did Saul want to attack the Philistines at night? What does it say? We gotta hurry up now. Why do you want to attack the Philistines at night? It says he wanted to rush upon the spoil and get some spoil. That's what it says. So he inquired of God. What's he say? He went to the priest, inquired of God, shall I attack the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand? What did God say?
God never answered.
No answer. No answer. What did Saul determine from this answer?
Someone had sinned.
Oh, we got a problem. We got a problem. Had this ever happened before? Joshua chapter 7?
Yep.
Yeah, they were sitting in the camp. And they did the same thing that Saul said. How did Saul going to find an answer? Find out who did it. Okay, he's going to find out who did it. And he's going to do something like cast lots. What does cast lots mean? How do they do that? Yeah. He uses the priest Urim and Thummim. Okay, so that's how they cast lots. We gotta hurry up because we're about out of time. So he gets down to Jonathan and he says, Jonathan,
What have you done? So what is Jonathan saying? What's it reveal about Jonathan? Jonathan says, it's me. I tasted honey. Did Jonathan do anything wrong? No. Jonathan didn't do anything wrong, but Jonathan shows that he's a humble man and he wanted to do what's right. That's what it reveals about Jonathan. Okay? So, what's Saul's answer? What's it reveal about him? What did Saul say? What's it reveal about him? What did he say about Jonathan? He said, you must die. What's it reveal about Saul? It reveals that his character is all about Saul. He didn't care about Jonathan and God giving them the victory that day about his son. That shows you the difference between Saul and Jonathan, okay? So how did the people rescue Jonathan? How did they do it? Must Jonathan die? Because Jonathan gave us the victory because God worked through Jonathan. The people rescued Jonathan that way, okay? So now at the end of the chapter, did Saul act valiantly and lead, to say about Saul, did he act valiantly and lead the army of Israel against many enemies during his time as king? Yes, he did. Did Saul deliver Israel from those who plundered them? Yes, he did. Was Saul a good king? No. But he did do his job as king. Okay? He did do his job as king. Okay? So, in chapter 15, who is giving Saul a command? In chapter 15. Who comes to Saul and who is giving Saul a command? And it's God through Samuel. God says to Samuel, go to Saul and command him to go and strike the Amalekites. Okay? And why is this happening? To punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they were coming out of Egypt. Okay? What was Saul commanded to do? What was the command? Go and annihilate Amalek. Every living thing. Every living thing. Everything. Okay? And what did Saul do? What did he do? He spared the best of livestock and spared Agag the king. Okay? And what did the Lord say to Samuel after that happened? I regret I made Saul king. So, I can't get to all this. Well, why did Saul stop at Carmel? Stopped at Carmel on his way up. Right here at Carmel. What did he do? Set up a monument to himself. Where did Saul meet Samuel? Where did they meet? Gilgal. They took everything from Amalek and went all the way up to Gilgal. Why had Saul not destroyed all the livestock? And what was his excuse when Samuel pressed him for an answer? The people. I was afraid of the people. Why did he not kill Agag and bring all the livestock back? When you go down there, if you killed everything, you come back with nothing. When you're a king and you go down to everything, you want to bring something back because you bring back a trophy. You want to bring back something. He had to bring back something to show what he had done. You bring back the king because it's a trophy. That's why Saul brought back livestock and the king to show what he had done. Something to show. Spoils of war. Sorry, we didn't have much time to do that. Okay, thank you all for a good class.